We're in a weird time, as many of you know. And there's something going on right now that I think should be a bigger deal in the financial news kind of area than is really being covered. I'm not sure about this. I certainly have no background in macroeconomics, but right now there are about 12 million. I'm unclear if it's 12 million households or 12 million people. I think it's 12 million households, which is significant, that are on average behind on rent $6,000 plus and counting. So when the pandemic hit, the federal government said we don't want a bunch of homeless people getting kicked out of their apartments and going couch to couch with relatives who maybe are immunocompromised. So we're going to put a moratorium on evictions. And if I am say I'm an assistant manager for a catering company. Let's say it's in Las Vegas or Orlando or Honolulu or someplace where there's a lot of hospitality and tourism. So things have dried up because of the pandemic, and I'm not making any money. Well, if I don't have enough to pay, if I'm not making any money, I'm not going to pay my rent. But I still have to buy food and all these other things. So I can fill out a form from the federal government that, as long as I say I'm being impacted by the pandemic and I'm making, I think, less than $200,000 a year, I cannot pay my rent and just owe my landlord, and then my landlord can't kick me out. So you can imagine this compounded. Now months have gone by and a year has gone by, and I still haven't made any money, and I still haven't paid my rent, but my landlord can't kick me out. And it seems to me like a pretty reasonable thing during a pandemic. We all have to take a hit. But put yourself in the position of the landlord. You have taken the risk. You've bought a multifamily 24 unit lower middle income rental property, and you're renting apartments to people and families, and they're not making any money because you live in Orlando, and there's just the people in your area are working for Universal Studios, and generally it seems like a lot of your tenants are not employed, or at least have filled out the form to say they've taken a hit. So you can't collect rent. So right now, everyone or many of the people in your unit haven't been paying rent for, I don't know, 6, 8 months. And you, of course, still owe your mortgage every month. So there's a saying, if you owe the bank $1 and you don't pay it, that's your problem. But if you owe the bank $1 million and you don't pay it, that's the bank's problem. And so what happens is I own a property, but of course I don't own it. The bank owns it. And now I'm not paying the bank, or maybe I've renegotiated. Frankly, nobody knows right now. No one knows no one's keeping track of this, whether the banks are renegotiating or for the landlords, or whether the landlords are just not paying, but the banks haven't foreclosed on the landlords yet. Or if the banks, what's going to happen when the tenants don't pay? Okay, now eventually the rent's going to be due. You owe, $10,000 on average in back rent by then, times 12 million households, and that money is due. Do the owners of the buildings then lose their buildings? Do the banks go under? I don't know what's going to happen, and maybe nothing. Obviously I don't have any background in this, but it strikes me that we're in the middle of something kind of weird in the lower middle income multifamily housing world. And if any of you guys are in this world, please say something on the chat and let me know if this rings true, or if this is crazy. But the reason I bring this all up, and as it relates to these CE forms, and of course CE is the one of the 6 divisions for the ARE, is that there is a tremendous amount of risk that owners take, and a tremendous amount of risk that contractors take, and really not that much risk that architects take. I mean, they may take it, but they're not insured for it. Generally, architects insurance doesn't cover a lot of risk. And so from the contractor's point of view, all kinds of things can go wrong. The price of steel could double in the time between when you bid the project and when the project starts. Or there could be a person who works on the site who's a subcontractor who gets electrocuted, or it could be a disastrous flood and mudslide that sets everything back. There's so many things that can go wrong from the contractor's point of view. And as I mentioned, there's so many things that can go wrong from the owner's point of view, like now your tenants aren't required to pay rent, but you're still required to pay the bank. And so there's this really elaborate dance that that the architect, the owner, and the contractor, and the subs and the consultants play once construction begins. And this really elaborate dance is in part, especially with regard to these forums, is in part a way for the owner to pass some of the risk onto the contractor. So basically, the owner is going to hire a architect, and this is in traditional design bid build. Traditional design bid build is just about all of the questions that you'll find on the ARE exam. And it's about 60%. It's shrinking, but it's still about 60% of the contracts that are out there are the design bid build flavor. And they have the advantage that they reduce the risk that the cost of the project will go up over the course. So basically what the owner wants, so when I say the owner wants to pass risk, I mean the owner wants to purchase the building. Let's keep it consistent with our example. Let's say the owner is purchasing a new lower middle income multifamily housing unit or a building or complex. And the owner wants to know how much it costs beforehand, because if she doesn't know how much it costs, she can't know if she's going to make money. She never knows if she's going to make money, but she at least has to have an idea that the numbers, that the unit economics work out, that if you spend X amount of dollars on Y units and you charge Z rent and everything works out and there's no pandemic, then, and there's no collapse of the local economy or the local real estate market for rentals, she wants to know that everything is more or less should be okay. So, what does she do? Well, she starts off by saying, okay, I'm going to have an architect design my multifamily housing complex, and the architect's going to design it, and then I want the best possible price for it. So we're going to put it out to bid. The architect's going to give me cost estimates at the end of each stage, at the end of DD and SD, but at the end of CDs, the architect is going to help me with bidding, and he's going to put it out to bid, and he's going to get a bunch of help me get a bunch of contractors that say this is what we're going to charge for exactly this building. Because what she wants, the owner wants, is she wants to be able to have a fixed price above all other things. She wants to not see the construction cost balloon, because once it does balloon, often it's the difference between making money on the project and losing money. There's a huge amount of money to be made in development, but there's a huge amount of money to be lost in development and as an owner. And so it's all about controlling your costs. And the way they control the costs is they keep the contractor as much as they can honest, and they make sure the contractor is insured to the hilt, so that if there's a mudslide or an electrocution of a worker or a whatever pandemic, that it's not going to redound back to the owner. It's going to be on the contractor, because the owner has risks based on whether the tenants pay rent, but the owner doesn't want the risk depending on whether there's a really heavy rain and a mudslide. So what the architect does at that point is the architect is the world's most glorified printer of receipts. So basically the architect is just, all these forms, or most of them, are just really remarkably simple forms, but remarkably complex receipts, the kind you would get for purchasing anything else. So let's get to it. We have G707A. These are all AIA documents. So really in front of each of these, it's AIA G707A, AIA G712, AIA G701, AIA G702, AIA G703, and AIA D200. This first one, AIA G707A, it has a really awkward name, consent of surety to reduction in or partial release of retainage. I feel like they need some commas in there, because you have to read that like 4 times before you realize that where the comma should be. It should be consent of surety to reduction, consent of surety to reduction in, comma, or partial release of, comma, retainage. Architects are not famous for their grammar. And these are all AIA documents. So what this is it's basically a way for the architect to create a receipt saying, okay, you, the contractor, have applied for a substantial completion. I, the architect, have awarded it. You, the contractor, have created a punch list, because believe it or not, it's the contractor who's responsible for creating the punch list, much to the contrary of the myth that it's the owner or the architect. And so now the contractor has finished the punch list, and the building is finished. And the owner or the architect is now going to have the owner release the retainage. And what the retainage is as the project goes along, so we'll start the project here, and in the kind of timeline, as it goes along throughout the 18 months it's going to take to construct this multifamily housing building unit complex. At each step, at this stage, and 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 this stage, the contractor is going to apply to the architect and say, can I be paid for what I've done up until now? And the architect is going to approve it or deny it. But the architect is going to approve it. And when the architect does, the owner is going to pay for the work that's been done, except the owner is going to keep a little money back just to keep the contractor honest, to make sure that the contractor is going to actually finish the job, because sometimes the contractor gets really busy at the end, and that doesn't help the owner. And if the contract has been paid all the way along, but the owner is really anxious to start renting the property, there's not really a huge financial incentive for the contractor to keep going and really wrap it up on time, except for the owner has some of the contractor's money. In fact, the owner probably has a lot of the contractor's profit, because the contractor has been taking what the owner paid him and paying it out to the subs. So a good portion of what the owner has held back is actually going to be the contractor's profit, and that money is going to come at the end. Now, it's typically something in the order of 5 or 10%. So if the contractor has done, say the contractor's done $100,000 in work this month, the contractor is going to submit it to the architect. The architect's going to walk the site and say, yeah, this looks like what we agreed on you do that was worth $500,000 or $100,000. It's $12,000 in drywall. It looks to me, you're claiming it's $16,000 in HVAC. That seems about right, given where we were last month. This all kind of squares up with me. So it passes a smell test. So I'm going to tell the owner to go ahead and pay you $100,000 that you did, except I'm going to say pay him $100,000 minus our standard, say 10%. So owner keeps 10,000, or owner doesn't pay 10,000 of the 100,000. Owner pays 90,000 of the 100,000, and then the contractor has to keep working and working and working to get that last 10%. So what this receipt is essentially saying, okay, I, the architect, tell the owner you can pay the contractor the rest of the money, because we're at substantial completion, or we're near enough to substantial completion, or final completion. But there's this kind of thing. It's really weird. There's all this kind of surety stuff. So it says in a provision with the contract between the owner and contractor is indicated above, and it says insert name of surety. Who's this surety? On bond, what do they mean bond? On bond of surety, hereby approves contractor. So because the owner really doesn't want to pay any more than the price she was quoted, she's going to force the contractor to take out as many as 3 or more, but they're kind of 3 basic ones, insurance policies, and they're called bonds, or they're called sureties, and the company that supplies them are called sureties. And for extra confusion, oftentimes if the owner is a public owner, like a university, they're gonna do what's called float a bond, which is a way of raising money for the building, for a public building. But forget that kind of bond. We're not talking about that. There are 3 types of bonds that you need to know about for this exam. And one of them is called a bid bond. And one of them is called a payment bond. one of them is called a performance bond. Now, we already covered bonds in a previous episode of Amber Book 40 Minutes of Competence. So if you haven't seen that one yet, I would direct you to our unlisted YouTube channel and you can watch that. But bid bonds are a way, so after the bidding happens, the owner wants to know that she's not going to have to go through bidding a second time. If she picks a winning bid, but then the winning bid says, ooh, the price of steel has been going up, I don't think I can make money on this project anymore, I'm out, before the contractor signs the contract, then the owner doesn't want to go back and have to bid everything out again. So the owner, as a prerequisite to the bidding process itself, is going to require that the contractor take out what's called a bid bond, which is an insurance policy that says if the contractor doesn't follow through and actually sign the contract after he's bid and sign a contract for the amount of money he's bid, then the surety, the insurance policy, the bond, will pay the owner the difference between the contractor's bid and the next lowest bid. So basically, the owner will say, okay, you don't want to sign the contract because the price of steel went up. I'm going to the next highest bid, and your insurance company, your surety, your bond is going to pay that difference. So that's what the bid bond is here. Now, that's not really relevant here because we're at the point of retainage. They've already signed a contract. They've built a building and they've already finished probably substantial completion, and now they're at final completion, and the contractor wants his retainage. So it's not really the bid bond that we're so much worried about. It's more the next two. So payment bond is another insurance policy. It could be from the same surety. I think it often is. And payment bond says that the contractors are going to pay, the general contractor is going to pay his subs. So the contractor is going to pay his subs. So it turns out if the contractor doesn't pay his subs, it eventually comes back to the owner. And this was a law, this is a series of laws that were passed a long time ago when, so what would happen is the owner would pay the contractor and the contractor wouldn't pay the sub. It's typically about 90 days, and it could be as much as 120, but it's typically about 90 days between when a sub buys, I don't know, let's say this apartment complex has one of those dumpster areas, and that dumpster area has a door, and the sub is gonna buy the steel for the door, that the sub, she's gonna weld it up and make a giant door from the steel. So it may be 90 days between when she buys the steel for the door that's in front of the dumpster and when the subcontractor gets paid. So it is a ridiculous amount of waiting time. And so for any subcontractor or contractor, but especially a subcontractor who's interested in growth, it's very difficult to grow because of cash flow problems, because you're always kind of laying out money for the steel, and then much later on, we'll get to that in a second, much later on getting paid. And so what will happen sometimes back in the day was the contractor, unscrupulous contractor, I know there are none of those, but there are some, and the contractor will get paid from the owner at the end, and the contractor will say, well, that's the only profit I made, or maybe I even lost money on the project. I'm not paying my subs. I got the money and I don't have any money to pay the subs. And so I've been putting everything on the credit card and there's just no money to pay the subs, or the contractor skips town. So what the government has done is it said, look, we need to have some reasonable laws, and it is not fair that this sub who laid out the money for the steel and fabricated the door to the dumpster doesn't get paid. So it actually comes back to the owner. The owner becomes responsible. And if the owner can't pay that sub, even though the owner already paid for the sub, the owner paid the general contractor for the work the sub did because the architect approved of that. But now the general contractor, in the kind of delay of everyone paying each other, 30 days, the delay of each stage, the general contractor has walked away and has gone back, filed for bankruptcy, and can't pay the sub. So now it's back on the owner to pay the sub a second time, once through the general contractor flaked, and now it's back to the owner. So the owner has to pay it. Well, you remember the owner doesn't want to pay any more than she agreed to. That's like absolutely crucial for her. So the owner had the contractor take out what's called a payment bond. And a payment bond is an insurance policy where the insurance policy, instead of the owner, will pay that sub for, and all the other subs for doing all the other little things like making doors for the dumpster. Now, the performance bond is kind of similar. It's another insurance policy, and it tells it assures the owner that if the contractor flakes out, declares bankruptcy, dies, whatever, the owner will be paid enough for a new contractor to come in and finish the job. So what this is saying, okay, I will pay you your retainage, but when I do, I no longer have any leverage over you. Once I've paid you, there's really nothing I can do. So if there's some weird thing where you didn't pay your subs, or we thought it was done, but it really wasn't done, and now you won't come back and finish it, I have these sureties, these bonds, these insurance policies that are going to cover it. And I want to make sure that the surety is on board with me paying the retainage, but the surety still owes me, the owner, money for anything that hasn't been finished. All right. Now, that 1994 is because that's the last time they updated it. So if it seems like a lot of these should be digital, I think there are digital versions. You can write in the comments whether or not you use the digital or old style. But so many of these are based on paper drawings from before spreadsheets and before things were digital. So anyhow, this is what it looks like. This is AIA document G7078. Do you need to memorize it? I don't know. You put it in the those of you who have taken CE, put it in the comments whether or not you think it's worth memorizing these numbers. You certainly need to know the concepts behind them, bonds and retainage, and just kind of the order of things and who's looking out for who. All right, our next form is G712, G712. And what that is, it's a shop drawing and sample record. And so there are these things called submittals. So after the architect, and I know you guys know most of this, many of you guys know most of this, but some of you guys never deal with any of this. So with these CE forms, I'm talking down to like 15% of you, and I'm sorry about that, but that's because many of the others, 30 or 40% of you have never seen any of these. So the shop drawing and sample record. So what this is so the architect is going to design something, say a dumpster area in a multifamily apartment complex, and that dumpster area needs a door, and the architect may just draw the door and have something in the specs that describes the performance of the door, but the architect often will not actually draw up how which parts of the door are welded and which parts are bolted, and what hardware should be used for the hinge of the door. That's typically outside the scope of what an architect will do. The architect will just say the door, in the specs, the door has to be able to handle maybe this much weight, this many foot-pounds of moment on the hinge, and it shall be treated in a way that it's rust-proof and so forth. So the architect will give those drawings to the owner, who will bid them out to the general contractor, who will bid the parts out to the subs, including our shop, our metal fabrication shop that's going to make this door. And so the metal fabrication shop, of course, knows the hinges and has a better sense of what type of welds and bolts and that kind of thing should happen with the steel. And the metal fabrication shop is going to say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give up the chain. I'm going to give the general contractor the drawings, my shop drawings of which pieces of steel I'm going to use and which ones are welded and which hinges I'm going to use. And I'm going to give that to the general contractor. So questions and submittals go up to the general contractor, who approves them. Then he passes them to the architect, and you are going to pass it, if it needs to be, to the consultant. So maybe in your specs, you said that the door needs to be able to handle this, basically a 14-year-old doing a skateboard trick and hanging on it. That much foot-pounds of moment on the hinge. And so the architect may hand it off to the consultant, in this case, the structural engineer, who's going to look over those drawings and say, man, looks reasonable to me. And the consultant's going to give it back to the architect. the architect's going to approve it. And then the architect's going to give it back to the general contractor, and the contractor is going to give the approval back to the sub, back to our metal fabricator. And so it's a really, like I said, it's just this really elaborate, kind of inefficient dance, but it's established, and the whole purpose is to make sure that the owner isn't screwed with a door that doesn't work, or liability from a door that pinches someone or falls off when the 14-year-old skateboarder hangs on it. So, and this is a very important concept for the exams also, is that the architect, and for that matter, the structural engineer in our example, they don't have to do all the calculations. So it's not like the architect said, here's a door, and in the spec says it has to resist this much, the hinges have to resist this much weight on it. And then the architect doesn't then necessarily have to recalculate everything based on the hinges that the owner provided. That the general contractor supplied it from the fabricator. Instead, the architect has to just look it over and say, yes, it meets the intent of the design. It looks like the kind of door we were talking about. And the consultant, the structural engineer says, yes, this looks consistent with what we would expect a door to do if it was, a 12, 15 foot long steel door. It looks like the cross bracing in the door is in the right place. It looks like other doors I've seen, and the consultant will, and it looks like the intent of what our spec said. Then the consultant will say to the architect, looks good. And the architect will say to the general contractor, it looks good. And the sub will then go ahead and fabricate it. Now the sub is still responsible for fabricating it so that it does meet those specific performance specifications. And the general contractor is still on the hook if it doesn't. So if in the end it looks like it's sagging, the door is sagging, then the owner and the architect and the consultant, and the structural engineer can say, this is not acceptable. This is not what we wanted. And the sub can't say, well, you approved it. I mean, she can, and the general contractor can, but that's not going to hold water, because it's up to the general contractor and the sub to meet the intent of the design, to meet the performance specifications. And it would just slow things down way too much if the architect had to, and the structural engineer had to confirm each hinge. So during the process, the architect just makes sure, yeah, that looks about right, or yeah, looks like there's no provision for making sure it doesn't rust. We live in Orlando. It's pretty marine. The environment here is pretty marine. It's very salty air, and this thing's gonna rust like crazy if you don't treat it, if you don't paint it or something. So the architect wants to make sure that the intent of the drawings is met, but the architect is not on the hook if the submittal drawings in this case don't meet the requirements as laid out in the specs. Now, what are submittals? Well, as you figured out, they're shop drawings. In the Amber book, I use shop drawings as the example most of the time, but submittals also include performance specifications. So maybe there are performance specs of those hinges that get submitted also to the general contractor, who approves them, gives them to the architect, who gives them to the structural engineer, who looks them over and says, that looks like reasonable hinges, and gives them back to the architect, who approves it, gives it to the general contractor, and back to the subcontractor fabricator. So it could be performance specifications for a product specifications in general. So maybe there's product specifications for the paint the metal paint that the fabricator plans on putting on, including the primer, so that the architect can look over the material or product specifications to make sure that that's the kind of paint that might resist rust. It could be a mock-up. So of course, we probably wouldn't do a mock-up of a door of a dumpster, but we might do a mock-up. The general contractor might create a mock-up of the roof, meaning the wall, a shortened wall with a window and a foundation, so that the owner and architect can approve that the intent of the contract documents looks to be met in this little sample wall. And then all the subs can have practice making the sample wall and roof and windows. And by the way, we can also kind of watch the sample wall, the mock-up, deteriorate in weather and see, oh, this looks like it's kind of like a leaking here. Maybe we need to put some more caulk right over here. So those are submittals too. So mock-ups, product and materials specifications, product and material samples, and shop drawings, all submittals. And so what we want to do is we want to keep track of these samples and shop drawings. So the architect needs to say, okay, there's a date, there's a title, there's a contractor or subcontractor trade. It was, the date was sent. It was referred to this to my consultant, which is the structural engineer, and so forth. So you see, this is all kind of like both really boring and really interesting at the same time. It's like this really prescribed dance that everyone does to make sure that everyone's insurance company is going to cover you. And so you're just, during construction administration, the architect is very much the referee. All right, now this is the big one in terms of the thing. If it's going to go over in cost, it's often because of these, and these are change orders. And so a change order is anything that's different in the contract. So maybe the architect actually never put a door on the in the drawings. Maybe the architect never put a door on the dumpster. And as it's going up, the owner realizes, oh, this is going to be ugly. You're going to see the dumpster. There's going to be flies. We need a door on this. So the architect will say, we need a door on this. And the contractor, of course, will say, great, pay me. I'm not going to build a door for nothing. It's a 12-foot steel door. It's not an easy thing to do. And so the architect will put a door on the drawings. And when you, the architect, do that, there's going to be a change order, and that change order is going to have to be agreed upon by very importantly, in writing. Every little change, like, it's not like the owner, this is really important to the exam and probably to real life in big projects, but the exam especially, the owner at the end will say, I didn't approve that. I didn't approve a door. That's crazy. So every change in the contract, which means every change in the drawings, that's at all consequential to the price or the timeline, has to be signed off on by the architect, by the contractor, and by the owner. So everyone's got to sign off and say, yes. The architect says, yes, we want a door. And the owner says, yes, we want a door. It's not in the contract. I recognize that. And the contractor says, yes, I'm going to build a door, but you're going to pay me. So here was the original contract sum. There's a net change. So there's going to be a new contract sum based on the extra. I don't know how much a door like that costs, but let's say it's $7,000. Let's say it's $4,000. So there's going to be a $4,000 adjustment upward for the contract. And if we need an extra, week to fabricate the door and install it on the contract, we're going to put a time increase also. So anything that is going to involve a change in the time, because the owner has plans to start renting it out before she has to start paying the bank interest in the mortgage, it has to be done on time or else. And the contractor is not going to build a door for free just because it's ugly. And but the owner doesn't want the price to go up. That's really, that it all comes down to that. So the contractor for that $6,000 door is going to say, yeah, I'll build a door. It'll cost you $8,000. And the contractor will say, come on, man, seriously? And the contractor will go to the owner will go to her previous contractor and say, what would you do for this door? How much would you pay for a door like this for a fabricator? I'd pay about $6,000. So the owner will come back to the GC and say, I'll give it to you for $4,000. And the contractor will come back $6,000, and they agree to $6,000. But there's a lot of negotiation that happens here, because to get the bid, remember, our general contractor had to be the lowest, or to get the contract, to get the project, our general contractor had to be the lowest bid. So if our general contractor really wanted to be the lowest bid, and construction is such a squishy thing to price out, because there are rain delays and all kinds of problems, that the contractor often, or the fear of the owner is that the contractor will underbid, bid less than the contractor, bid a price less than the contractor could ever make money building the project at, and is going to make up his profit by charging the contractor for change orders. So the contractor says, I need a door, the owner says, I need a door. The contractor said, it's not in the contract, that'll be 10,000. The contractor kind of has the owner captive at that point. So the control goes from the owner to the contractor once the contract is signed. And so these things have to be hashed out. So change orders are a really big deal to an owner and frankly to a contractor. All right. Now, these are the different kind of, there's a lot of confusion about about like the difference between construction drawings and construction documents and contract documents. And I even in the Amber book, I'll screw those up all the time. I'll talk about CDs and I'll really be talking about construction drawings, but I'll call them construction documents, or I'll be talking about construction drawings and I'll call them contract documents. And so as part of the contract documents, which is everything here, we have the construction drawings. You know what those are. Those are what you thought architecture was, and it still kind of is. It's your drawings, your CD set, your construction drawing set. But that combines with the specifications, which explain exactly how the hinges are going to perform and they're not going to squeak. And it explains that the hinges can take a skateboarder and that the hinges are going to be painted with a paint that makes it so it doesn't rust. Those are going to be in the specifications, which are, as far as NCARB and ARE is concerned, going to be master spec, going to be kind of, that's the Dewey Decimal System or the table of contents that the architects and the contractors and the subs are going to use. And those together are going to be the contract documents. And they're going to be combined with all the bidding documents, procurement and contract, and the actual contract that the owner signs with the general contractor. And all that together is going to, with any addenda, any changes, and this has been covered in previous 40 minutes of competence. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you can look at the previous ones. But any addenda, which are any changes in the bidding documents that happen in the drawings or the specs after, or the contracts after the bid has gone out, but before the bidders have come back with their price. So the owner, with the help of the architect, is going to take the construction drawings, the specifications of all the hinges and everything else, and all the contracts saying you're going to get that. If you take this job on, general contractor, you need to finish it by October, because I have to have people in there by December, because I have to start paying the bank back by January. So I need to be collecting rent. So all of this goes out to bidders. And then the bidders will say, it's unclear what type of hinge you're going to need on the door. And so the hinge type will be included in the addenda. And then the general contractor can get a more accurate cost from his subcontractor, the metal fabricator. So she'll give him a more accurate cost because she knows what the hinges are. So if there's a change between when the bidding documents go out and when they come back, that's in the addenda, and those get folded into the bidding documents. The contract documents include everything all the way up to contract modifications. Now, what are contract modifications? That's what we're talking about here. So we're talking about the change orders. Basically, contract modifications are change orders. So change orders are changes to the contract. The contract did not have a door for our dumpster. Now it does have a door. And so now the construction drawings have changed because they now have a door in them. The specifications have changed because they now have the performance of the door. That's like the fine print of the door. And the contract has changed. We're now giving the owner is now giving the general contractor $6,000 to have our metal fabricator make a door. And all of that is the contract documents. Now, the project manual is everything that could theoretically go on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. So it literally could be a manual, like a big 3-ring binder. So it includes the specifications, which are our fine print about our hinges. It includes our contract, which says that everything has to be done by October of next year, or else we're going to be in big trouble. It includes our addenda, which are the description, which are like this, our change order. I'm sorry, not our change order. The addenda are our new specs that have our new specifications that have that have the hinge and the door, and it includes our change order. So everything, all these forms go into the project manual. So all right, now, oops, um, AIA G702. So this is what I was talking about before, where the architect. This is also really important on the exams to understand. So the architect is going to approve payment. So our fabricator fabricated the door. The fabricator then needs the contractor to pay her. The contractor needs the owner to pay him, but the owner does not want to pay more than she originally planned, and she definitely doesn't want to pay early anything she doesn't have to. First of all, the amount of money we're talking about sometimes is so big that the interest on those payments, keeping the money in your own bank account actually makes a difference in your profit. So the owner wants to hold on to these $100,000 for this month as long as possible. And so everyone's kind of screwing each other by waiting too long to do everything. And so again, if you have a spouse who's in kind of finance, this is like the new thing, is trying to figure out how we can use capital to make this whole thing go smoother and more efficiently, so that the metal fabricator can hire more people, but she can't do it because she never has enough money, because she's always having to lay out money for the steel and then wait 90 days to be paid for the door. Anyhow, this is the application and certificate of payment. So the contractor is going to fill everything out, saying, fill this form out saying, this is the work I did this month, and you should pay me 90,000. Well, really, you should pay me 100,000. But there's going to be some in retainage. So all the retainage is recorded. So there'll be 10,000 set aside in retainage. That's the money that's going to be paid out at the end to keep me honest as a contractor. There's change orders included here. Now we have to fabricate a door, and that's a change order. So we're going to add, $6,000 for that door. We have the original contract sum, what you were supposed to pay me at this stage, and the balance to the finish, how much you owe, including retainage and so forth. And then the architect certifies it. So it looks like this. The sub is going to invoice the general contractor. The general contractor is going to submit this AIAG 702 form to the architect. The architect is going to approve it. If it looks good to you, the architect, you're going to give it to the owner. She's going to pay the general contractor, and the general contractor is going to then pay the sub. See, it's just a dance. It's not hard. It's not complex. It's just complicated. But there's reasons for all of it. And most of these reasons are because the owner does not want to pay the GC, and the GC may have underbid and wants to screw the owner. So you are the referee in between all of this, and that is G702. Now, there's another form that's a sidecar to G702 called G703, and that's where you can go into detail. Again, these days, I'm pretty sure this is mostly done with either software or a spreadsheet, but maybe you guys are doing it by hand. So maybe put in the comments if you're doing it by hand or not. But right, this is like 25% more interesting than you thought it would be. So all these forms, because we all hate paperwork. This is a description of the work that the contractor did. So the contractor fabricated and hung a door on a dumpster, and the scheduled value was $6,000, and the materials. So there are different kind of amounts of money sometimes that are for materials stored, that are kept in retainage for materials that are stored, like the steel that was purchased for the door versus work that was done, like the actual fabrication of the steel door. And you're always kind of keeping track. It's really annoying. You're always keeping track of what the balance is and what the retainage is. And so you're the referee for the nickel and diming that's going back and forth. And frankly, there is a ton of money that is overcharged or undercharged, not often unscrupulously, but not always. There are sometimes the steel fabricator will get a discount for having paid for the steel with cash. but she doesn't get that discount because someone forgets to ring it up, and nobody knows. So there's actually a lot of money to be found by being a bean counter in this world on big projects. Anyhow, that is G703. It's the sidecar to G702, which is the way that the contractor gets paid by applying to the architect. Finally is our AIA document D200. It's a really clever project checklist. And again, put in the comments on the Zoom call, if you are in the chat, put if you actually use this. It's about 25 pages long, and it's remarkably comprehensive. And if you haven't looked at it, I would totally look over it and kind of think about your project that you're working on now. So this is a table of contents. It covers pre-design and site analysis and SD and DD and CD and bidding and negotiation and CA. And I'll go through a couple of pages. Here's one of them. So we can zoom into here, and it's a check sheet. Determine if the owner is financially sound. That's a good idea. Determine if the owner is committed to the completion of the project. That's a good idea too. Is the impact of the project from social, economic, climate, solar, views, transportation, parking, support services, security, and so forth, variances, special permits, and it goes on and on and on. And so in pre-design, review the final agreement with legal and insurance counsel, approve any modifications made by the owner or renegotiate, verify that party signing for owner is legally authorized to execute the agreement. I mean, things that you probably might not have thought about. I better verify that the person signing for the owner is actually a person who is authorized to sign for the owner, because later the owner could say, I didn't sign a contract with you. That was one of my employees, and I've since fired her. So on down, assign it a project number so that when you start making sketches, there's a project number associated with it. So later on, when you're kind of filing away your instruments of service, you can know that your sketch was filed. Design development, review and update staff time and production cost productions. Department of Health, identify all documents with project number and date. Obtain owner's approval of expenditures for any models, perspectives, or renderings required for the project. So if there's going to be a model and it's going to cost money for the owner, maybe we should get the owner to approve that expenditure. And it goes on and on and on. All right, that concludes this week's Amber Book 40 Minutes of Competence, focused on the glorified receipts that are the CE forms. For next week, this is actually only a part of it. On our email that we send out, we'll give you the full assignment. There's a bunch of questions like this, but for all these different flavors of project delivery, the question is, who prepares the cost estimate? Who prepares the cost estimate? And so this is kind of, we're going to get into contracts. So if you're not already on our mailing list, go to send us an email at firms@amber-book.com. And we'll get you on our mailing list. So we'll send you a link. And usually we send this stuff out usually about a day before. But I think this one we'll send a little bit earlier to give you some time to answer them all. There's about 12 or 15 questions like this that ask whose responsibility between the owner, architect, contractor, design build entity, or construction manager, who does all these different things. And we'll get that out to you. This is usually the part where I go over questions from last time, but last time I spent a long time answering questions and there were no leftover chat questions. So this is one that has been floating around that actually was on the NCARB forum a while ago in September. And when I saw it, I took a screenshot of it because I knew one day there would not be a question that I would answer from the previous week, in this case, 3 weeks ago because of the holidays. And I thought this is a good one to tackle today, since we were talking about so many of the kind of professional practice side of the field. And it says, hi team, why does the A201 differentiate between the work and the project? And so the work is the contract that the owner signs, and the project is all of the work for all the contracts. And so sometimes there's a multiple prime situation where, say that the owner was building some specialized, let's find it. The owner is building a specialized, what's a specialized, a data center. And so the owner has hired you, the architect, to design the building, but a lot of the inside, a lot of the interior stuff where the data center for the racks for all the computers is going to be designed by an engineering firm that specializes in data centers. So the work for the contract that you're designing for, that you're making your drawings for, is the building. But the project includes both the work, the building, and the work of the other prime contract, which is going to be to the engineering firm that's going to lay out the racks for the computers, and the general contractor for the computers, installing all the computers, is likely going to be a different general contractor than is building the building. So the project needs to, we need to be able to differentiate between the work, if we're talking about like when substantial completion is for the building. That's based on the work, based on your shell of the building. But we also sometimes need to include project, because we need to talk about when you're laying out electrical receptacles or your electrical equipment panels. We need to coordinate between the specialist who deals with the interior of a data center and you, the architect, who is doing the shell. So that's the work versus the project.
Hi, I have a question. Is there anything that stops the contractor from funneling some of the owner's money into another project? Like, are there receipts that need to be? I know on that continuation sheet, the contractor pretty much fills that out, but is there something we can do to kind of protect the owner's money?
It's a good question. And the answer is yes and no. I mean, the answer is no in a way, because you're paying the contractor for the work, just like you would pay someone who sold you a computer mouse. You're paying for the mouse. They can do whatever they want with the money. They already gave you the mouse. But what the owner is most afraid of is that the contractor is going to be financially insolvent. And so if the contractor is taking the money you're paying him and sending it to another project, then the fear is that they will be insolvent. But the payment, the surety bonds, the payment, the surety, the bonds, the insurance policies for the performance bond and the payment bond cover the owner. Now, the owner doesn't, the owner doesn't want to have to deal with that. The owner would rather not go to the insurance company and get the lawyers involved. But the owner is somewhat already protected. That's what that's about. If the owner requires a bond. Now, lots of projects are not completed with bonds. I think just about all public projects are. Now, in the end, the owner pays those bonds, pays for those bonds, right? So, ostensibly the contractor is paying for the bond, but the contractor is passing that cost on in their bids. So the owners don't always require all the bonds, because the owners have to balance their appetite for risk versus their appetite for seeing the cost of construction go up by a tiny percentage points. Um, but as long as the subcontractors are being paid, then the contractor, as far as I know, can do anything that they want with the money. They can buy a boat. It's their profit.
Hey, I also have a question.
Mhm.
I was wondering if the architect can ever, go back and cancel out a previously approved application for payment. Is that a thing?
That is a very good question. I don't know. I assume it would require a change order. Um, and of course, once the owner has paid the contractor, the lawyers of the owner and the contractor would have to negotiate paying that money back. I don't know that the architect can go in and cancel it out and then have the contractor then pay the owner. I mean, the world of construction doesn't really work like that. Once you pay someone, it's really hard to claw it back. So I'm going to guess no. But if somebody has a different experience, you can put it in the chat and I can share it with you guys next time.
Um, Hi, I had a question.
Yep.
I heard from previous questions, somebody said that contractor fills the continuation sheet. So my question is, who fills all the AIA documents? Isn't the architect responsible for filling all the 5 documents that we talked about today, or contractor, or it's both?
That's also a very good question. Um, the architect fills out most of them. Certainly, of course, the check sheet um, would be the architect. The change orders are prepared by the architect, not by the contractor. Ostensibly, although of course in practice, in the contracts, the architect's supposed to prepare the change order. In practice, the contractor does often. So the contractor says, all right, I negotiated with the owner that it's going to be $6,000 extra. I really want to get paid. Here's the change order. Can you file this with the owner and get her approval, get her signature so I can get paid for this door. So in reality, it's often the contractor who fills out some of these, but I think all of these, as far as the contracts are concerned and NCARB is concerned with the exams, I think all of them are filled out by the architect.
Even the shop drawings, and shop drawings.
Yeah, so especially the shop drawing log. So the shop drawing, that definitely is filled out by the architect. So the log, so the architect, of course, isn't making the shop drawings. The architect is logging that the shop drawings were submitted so that shop drawing thing wasn't the shop drawings, of course, it was the list of shop drawings.
Yeah.
So it's just the table of contents of submittals of shop drawings and samples. So saying, yes, I did receive them, because you can imagine, given that the submittals go like this, you can imagine at the end, there's no door. And the owner says, I wanted a door. And the architect says, yeah, we had a door. And the fabricator says, I submitted the drawings, you never got back to me. I can't start building it until you give it to me, because if the architect rejects the door because the hinges aren't appropriate, then these may be, $300 hinges. So then the fabricator, that may be her whole profit for the project. So the fabricator won't buy the hinges until the architect has approved the shop drawings and the submittals. And you can see the friction, right? The architect has now, in reality, moved on to the next project. And she does not want to deal with hinges. That's the last thing she wants to deal with. She's trying to finish a competition that has a deadline for this really sweet museum. And the last thing she wants to do is look over hinges. But she has this this thing from the general contractor that came from the shop of the metal fabricator of hinges. And now the architect has to look over some drawings that she made 12 months ago. And what are these hinges? I don't even remember. What are they talking about? And has to look through the specs. What do we say about hinges? I mean, I guess they meet our, the intent of our requirement. I remember now what our intent was, or, maybe Jonathan was the one who did this and he doesn't work here anymore. And I don't know. Now I have to look through this whole thing and figure out hinges of a door. I don't even know what kind of door they're talking about. And so you can imagine that the architect, and then the architect, when she does look over, she says, oh, you know what, I better send this to the structural engineer, because these hinges have to be able to support someone hanging it. I don't have the wherewithal to even look if that passes a smell test. So the architect gives it to the structural engineer, who has the same issue. The structural engineer is excited about a new project, has a new deadline, and a set of drawings that he's trying to get out. And the last thing he wants to do is start doing calculations on hinges. And then our consultant gives it back to the architect gives it to the general contractor, and so forth. So you can imagine that in that process, the architect is often the one who's slowing things down, because a general contractor may have penalties for taking too long, going beyond the data, blowing the timeline beyond the date of substantial completion. The owner may have substantial penalties from the bank if she doesn't start paying the bank payments based on rent that's going to come in. And so these guys are really concerned about time, and the architect is often, frankly, moved on to the next thing. And so that's, part of the reason for this is that the architect, and there's now in writing in the contract, there's a tradition, I think, of 14 days maximum turnaround. But for hinges, the architect should really turn it around quicker. But maybe for something much more complex that requires the architect to do a lot more digging than just a hinge, the architect may need all 14 days. So if you want to really impress the general contractor and the owner of a big project, turn those submittals around quickly and approve them. Because frankly, you're going to have to approve them later, and you're not going to be less busy in 10 days than you are now. You think you will be, but you and I both know that you will not be. So when you start your own firm, if you have a reputation of turning these around, it doesn't seem like it would be that important. And frankly, from an architect's point of view, it isn't. But that's exactly why it's important to these people, is because they'll recognize that you were quick to turn these things around, and that's important to them. So having a system where you keep track of what the action was, and these dates are like the dates are almost the most important things on these, because they're almost always approved. But how quickly you turn around in some ways reflects a little bit on the quality of your company, which is kind of weird because we're never taught that, but that's a thing. All right.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, I had a question about retainage. Is a percentage of retainage taken out at each application for payment, or is a percentage taken out at the end?
It's taken out at each application for payment.
Okay.
That's how the owner keeps her leverage over the contractor to finish the job on time. Even though the contractor might have been offered a more lucrative job with a more demanding timeline. So since signing this contract, so the owner will withhold a little bit of each payment. And it gets a little complicated because sometimes it's like 10% of labor, but 5% of materials. I don't know why they do that. Maybe one of you guys knows. I assume that sometimes materials are a big expenditure. And the general contractor may need every penny to, they're buying an elevator from Otis or a bank of elevators at maybe, $200,000. And the contractor doesn't have $200,000 laying around because the contractor is not going to get paid for 60 days for that. And so the contractor, if they're going to buy it, they don't want the owner to hold too much of that back because they need every penny they can. It's a crazy system. From the money, and the more you look into it, it is just the amounts of money that people are fronting. I mean, do you remember the last time you went out to dinner with your colleagues and your boss said, your boss said, I can't make it. Can you pay for it? I'll reimburse you. And you were like, sure. But then the bill came and it was like, $300. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't like putting out $300 of my own money that I'm sure I'm going to get reimbursed, but I just don't like this process. It's not a comfortable feeling. But I understand that the owner's kid got sick and can't show up and someone has to pay for the bill. Well, multiply that to $200,000 for elevators. And it is just and the contractor doesn't know that the owner isn't going to go bankrupt because of the pandemic. And so there is just, this is not for the faint of heart to go into these worlds. And so everyone's holding money back from everyone. And everyone's trying to make their profit, which involves screwing the others. There's a reason, real estate is very much, including this process, it's very much a zero-sum game. In something like software, there are positive externalities. So if Google does a great job, then Google makes more money, but also I can do a better job teaching you because I can look stuff up more efficiently. If I do a great job with the Amber book, I make more money, but you can do a great job because you can spend less time and pass your exams quicker. So those are, a lot of the world has moved to a world where, to a system or a regime where we have positive externalities, where it's win-win, where I can do better by making better software and you can do better by designing better pharmaceuticals. But in the real estate world, it's still very much zero sum. If I'm selling a property, My job is to make as much money selling that as possible. Your job as person buying it is to pay as little as possible. Either I win or you win. There's zero, and this is, if you kind of look at the mentality of people who are in real estate, they have this often a zero-sum game because there's only so much real estate. We can make more software. I can make more software and it won't hurt you. In fact, it may help you make your software better. But I can't make more land. And so, or I can't do it in a reasonable way. And so reasonably cost-effective way. And so it is very much a I win or you win. Like if I win, you lose, and if you win, I lose kind of situation in this world. And you, the architect, are a little bit the referee during the construction process. I have time for one more question.
While the last person's asking their question, do you mind going to the diagram with the construction drawing specification?
Yeah, I made that yesterday. I thought that was kind of a good one. Let's see.
It was helpful. So I'm gonna.
This one?
Yes, thank you.
On my iPad, I can't get rid of those circles. Sorry. I can do it, but I have to. It often makes it so that the the whole thing goes away, and I have to start again. All right. I have time for one more question.
Michael, would you say it's safe to say that we do approve shop drawings, or would you have to say that we review them only?
We review them, and we review them, we approve them, but we are not liable for missing something in them unless the drawings clearly didn't meet the intent. So from a liability point of view, we kind of didn't. It's like it never happened, but from a process point of view, we totally did. So because you can imagine a situation where the shop drawings come out and you realize that the door, the person who's making the shop drawings might not really understand their dumpsters inside. And that fabricator might have had the door swinging inward, right? I mean, you could totally imagine that happening in a big project. And now she bought the hinges and has everything welded up so that the hinges are going to swing inward. But if you swing this door inward, it's going to hit the dumpster and it's not going to be able to open, and it's going to be a real problem. And so if in the drawings, it's pretty clear that it swings inward, that's the kind of thing that you should catch. Wait a minute, there's dumpsters in here. We can't have it swinging inward. And so if it's very clear that it swings inward, that would be the kind of thing you're reviewing for, the intent of the design. But you are not reviewing for this particular hinge that she picked is exceptionally squeaky and is going to keep people awake all night when when my neighbors throw out the trash, they're going to open that door hinge, and this one is notoriously squeaky. It's not up to the architect or your consultants, your structural engineer, to know that hinge is squeaky. And that's up to the fabricator who does this all day. So the fabricator should be looking at product reviews of the hinges before she specifies $200-$300 hinges. She should be doing what all of us do when we spend $600 on something, which is looking at product reviews. It's not reasonable for the architect to look up product reviews on the hinges because the architect doesn't know what the alternative hinges are and can't comparison shop because the architect doesn't know, whether they're going to be bolted or welded. All right. Thank you guys. This was fun. It's always fun. Welcome to the new people, all the New Year's resolution people. Welcome. We meet every Thursday at the same time, and we can't wait to have you back next time. I will see you guys. Good night. Get licensed.